Welcome back, friends, and this is almost the last part we have reached in terms of developing our understanding about relationship of communication with consumer behavior. During this process, we have sort of established the importance and role of communication all through in consumer decision making. Consumer behavior we try to understand because we want to understand consumer decision making and the process, because we want to influence that with the help of communication. And now this section is about persuading the consumer. Persuasion is an art. Persuasion is, it requires strength, it requires effort, it is effortful basically. You see, convincing someone is easy, or I should not say very easy, but convincing you can do with the help of arguments, you can do with the help of lots of creativity in as far as your messages goes, and person says yes, the thing is good, fine. You have developed an attitude of that person towards the product or the service. Persuading the person to actually move out and go for that product. So, McDonald's 20 rupees burger, done, very good, but the consumer actually goes there and consumes that burger and rest of the food along with the family and keeps going there, that is effortful. A movie is coming, James Bond movie is coming, Batman movie is coming, fine, Spider-Man movie is coming, fine. You have lots of communication, that is good, but people going out watching that movie is effortful. You generate a trial of a web series, people watch the first serial, then pursuing them to keep on watching that series is effortful. You launch an ice cream, people eat it for the first time, it is a humongous success. Baskin Robbins, you remember, it was extremely successful in India. Where is Baskin Robbins now? I am not sure. With all due respect, not sure. Several products, and I have been promising you that I would not be referring to product failures too much here, because I know that it is not just because of communication that products become successful, it is lots of customer acceptance which is required. But what we are talking about here is persuasion. So, taking the customer there, and let us look into the elements of how to persuade consumers systematically through the understanding we have developed by looking at the two perspectives we have discussed earlier, psychological and sociological. And let us consider information processing and perceptual defense here, which is very important. You see, all the information is not readily acceptable to the customer. Take yourself, think of yourself. You see so many advertisements, you like those, you discuss those. Do you accept everything there? Do you start changing your purchasing habits because of those advertisements? No. Why do you stick to the product you are still using despite of the advertisement of the other product is very attractive and you like it? Because there is a perceptual defense. So, the first thing which comes as an obstacle is the cognitive consistency impetus. That is why the customers would change or would not change her attitude or shake her belief actually. For example, a particular kind of a rice which a homemaker is purchasing all through, you keep on banging on India Gate Basmati rice or whichever way, would she easily change that? For example, a homemaker purchases Vaat Taj for her family, would she change it so easily? Despite of the fact that other advertisements are exceptionally good, would she change that? And not even in case of highly credible product offerings. For example, branded jewelry. Did people leave their goldsmiths and traditional shops so easily, or have they left them? No, they are still using that. How many people, despite of the fact that Bajaj scooters, they stopped manufacturing those, how many people actually stopped riding those scooters despite of the fact that they were not there in the market? You see, even if a product is discontinued, still it is very difficult for you to bring in a new product for them so as to change their habits or usage. So, this cognitive consistency impetus is the first thing which comes as a blockade, and this has to be understood by the marketer, because then your messages would be catering to this element. You would be having at the back of your mind, marketers would be having this element in their thought process, that message would be attracting the attention, would be developing a recall, but would not be so easily taking the customer to the purchase. The second element comes in the form of advertising clutter. Let us do a small exercise, or you may do a small exercise. Choose one category of products, let us say a two-wheeler, let us say a toothpaste, and try and watch similar kinds of advertisements from different advertisers and marketers. That is one part. Second part, try and look for the clippings of the advertisers from the same products through different modes. What I mean to imply here is that the clutter would keep on rising in case of one product category. That is, you are watching 3-4 different advertisers of similar category products on television. Now, you have those advertisements simultaneously in newspapers as well, on internet as well, and then you have ended up watching 4 products in 3 different modes, meaning 12 times. And if it happens in 3-4 days continuously, then multiple times. What kind of time you would have spent on those? Probably first time slightly longer, second time slightly less, but cumulatively there would be a substantial number of minutes which you would have spent as far as those advertisements would have gone, and this is precisely the clutter. And then keep on adding products to it, then go beyond this category, then look into other products, consumer products and so on, and just try and list down, just hang a piece of paper on on the wall, and every morning just note down that how many advertisements you have seen for different kinds of products this 1 hour in the morning, then in the evening just add something there. Just do it for 3 days and you would realize that you have ended up spending lots of time in watching advertisements, and many of those you would not recall at all, but they would have consumed a space in your mind, they would have gained your attention and so on, and that is precisely what advertising clutter is. Why to understand this? Obviously, one marketer is spending millions of dollars to develop one advertisement and to reach the customer, and if the clutter hampers that flow to a percentage and a degree, it definitely is going to hit the the cost which this marketer is going to pay for that. The third element is in the form of selective attention. Customer doesn't pay heed. This is a very common kind of a thing. Have you noticed yourself watching your mobile phone while watching TV simultaneously? It always happens, always. How many times you look out the window of your cars or buses you are traveling in, or airport lounges, how many times you look up from your mobile phone to watch the advertisement on the billboard in front of you? Remember last time when you have traveled, can you recall that what advertisement you saw on the billboard, in the airport lounge or at a railway station or a bus station or somewhere? Can you recall that advertisement? No, because simultaneously you were watching your mobile phone or your attention was somewhere else, selective attention. You can do this experiment today itself if you are watching this advertisement, video in the afternoon. Just remember that what were those advertisements beyond first page which you saw in the newspaper today, and that is what you can think in terms of selective attention. It is a long and detailed subject, but that is what precisely you think of selective attention, and these are barriers. These are very specific barriers which marketers have to face. You see, we are talking of cognitive responses here, and the effort from the side of the advertiser to influence the beliefs and the attitudes of the customers bring in cognitive response. Why should I shake up whatever I am thinking? And that is an imbibed resistance in the minds of the customers as such. There is a whole lot of theoretical backdrop to these kind of things, but you see, it is very simple basically, and that can be most evident in evident in children. For example, you introduce a particular kind of a product to them, and then you try to put up advertisements across. They would like those, but they might not easily change those, even if you want them to change, but they might not. For example, a particular kind of a toothbrush which they were attracted to, they purchased that, and you were not so happy, you wanted them to use some other product. Would you be able to change that particular choice through introducing several kinds of messages to them? Not so easy. And this is evident almost everywhere, all through, and that is where averages or average association of customers with the products are being calculated, and several other things are being associated with, and we have talked about few of those associations in the earliest part of this of the discussion in this subject. Now, how to cater to the resistance from the side of the customer to change his belief is a big question, and that is what we will try to address now onwards for a short while. There is one model which is very supportive of this kind of a thing for us to understand, and then to go for this kind of a progression reaching to the minds of the customer, and that is ELM model, elaboration likelihood model. And this elaboration likelihood model, like several other models, has a broader framework to offer. Let us talk about this for a while, and then whichever model comes your way, and I motivate you to look into other models as well. There are several, and we cannot go for every model and deciphering that in this, because the structure of this discussion is related to integrated marketing communication rather than discussing every model in detail, but this is one of the most acceptable or discussed one of those models, and then you can compare it with other models available as such. Now, the basic premise of this model is to understand how a persuasive communication may affect a person's attitude, his motivation, and ability to elaborate on the message during processing. So, motivation is the key point of concentration, and elaboration on the message, basically how the consumer will get associated with or develop a thought around that message, basically how, or to be precise, how the consumer would let it in his thought process. That is, because we have been talking of cognitive resistance more or less, or cognitive response associated with resistance. So, how the customer would now then comes in motivation and ability to elaborate the message can be seen as a function of how involved a person is with the consumption decision in question. Again, we have talked about experience and involvement, and take a cue from there, and ELM also talks about that. But here we are talking of persuasion. There we were talking of few other things including brand loyalty. But remember, brand loyalty would come when resistance would be reduced and customer would have acceptance towards the message, so much so that he would change his product or purchase the product even if it is for the first time. So, that motivation and ability to elaborate is the point of concern. And this involves decisions which result in active mental elaborations, whereas uninvolving decisions will implicate passive and or passive processing, should I say. And here comes two routes. Now it becomes very interesting. You see, to persuade the customer, there are two elements or routes of persuasion, and that is what ELM model talks about. Remember, ELM model means elaboration likelihood model. How would you let the things in? How would you elaborate upon whatever? So, there is a central route to persuasion, means you are focusing upon the core element of the product through messages which are talking of that core benefit or utility or association point or focal point, whichever way you want to look at it. And then a peripheral route of persuasion is also there. How from all the sides you wish to reach to that customer. And just to focus upon the central route, for example, Patanjali Atta noodles. So, Patanjali Atta noodles never says Patanjali noodles, Patanjali Atta noodles says Atta noodles, and they talk about benefit of Atta. And then there are automotives which, despite of being engines or machines, technically talk about safety, because safety matters, and that is what they project. You see, first important thing which now automotives they project nowadays is the number of airbags, because that has become a very prime concern for customer to choose. Just this morning I was looking at an advertisement of a car that apart from other things it has 8 airbags. That means all the people sitting in the car are safe, and that is what automotive manufacturers are projecting. Recently I was visiting a showroom and I was just looking into the features of a new launch, and a young child was asking this salesman that, do you have 6 bags here or 8 airbags here or 4 airbags here, or how many airbags are there? For example, how many passengers are safe in this car in case of any emergency? So, safety, and in case of noodles, atta. And then have you seen advertisers talking about jogging shoes or running shoes or walking shoes, specifically telling what this would be used for? Have you talked about they have talked about this? Has someone talked about the purity of water from Himalayas? Has anyone talked about this? You remember that people talk about that. And recently some pizza with crust or thin crust or filling, those kind of things basically. So, you see, that is how central route to persuasion, and we can go on, and there are many things which you may agree with. And then comes in peripheral route. Now, this is related to the referral cues and refers to the features other than the actual argument about the brands or brand performance for that matter. For example, consumers learn to associate pleasant feelings, attractive images with the brand, and their attitude towards the brand becomes positive. For example, some tunes which take them there. Tourism advertisements are also associated with lots of pictures, and airlines advertisements are associated with lots of kind of discussions on food, for example, and storyboards talking about the comfort of seats and so on, and taking you through all other than the core argument, wherein the core argument in case of airlines might be the destinations or the time or those kind of things basically. But here they are talking of hot food and the way you are served and the safety of your goods and so on. So, that is where peripheral route comes in. Now, we will talk about whatever we have discussed slightly systematically, traversing through different elements one by one. These slides are more or less explicit in nature, and I will go along with you while you read those and listen to me all together. So, you see, tools of influence through persuader's perspective, how a persuader looks at the consumer, looks at the customer actually. So, there is one element of reciprocation, using favors to encourage the customers to reciprocate by buying the product actually. So, then there are several communicational elements or promotional elements which are associated with reciprocation perspective actually. Commitment and consistency. After people make a choice, there is a strong tendency to remain faithful to that choice, and that is how persuader thinks about that. If somehow he generates that choice and fetches initial commitment, then there is a chance of customer remaining committed, and that is the beauty of it, because we have seen that how rational the customer is, how sociologically the customer is influenced, how culture plays a strong role, how values they play strong role and so on. Then social proof, behavior of others provide a proof of how one should behave, we have talked about it. Then liking, consumers likely to adopt an attitude or undertake an action when a likable person promotes that action. We have just mentioned that with reference to celebrities, that can be one also, but otherwise someone whom you can resonate with. Then authority, people are raised to respect authority figures and to exhibit a sense of duty towards them, kind of someone who has that command over your thoughts basically, and that is how persuaders they look at this. Scarcity is also one of those elements, and this is where I would end my discussion in as far as this whole aspect of persuasion goes. And let us watch this very carefully, wherein the influence process is also related to persuadee's perspective. Up till now we talked about persuader's perspective, here we are talking of persuadee's perspective. And there are two aspects, persuasion vehicles and persuadee characteristics. So, let us look at the vehicles. Message arguments, for example. You see, the strength or quality of message arguments is often a major determinant of whether and to what extent persuasion occurs. How logical it is, how passionate it is, how comparative it is, and so on. And that is where many communications are based on customer referrals, wherein customer says that this product is good and I am happy to use it. So, that referral points. You see, lot many books are being sold on the basis of endorsements, lot many places are being sold that way, lot many hotels they do that, and other references are being generated all through, and real life characters are brought in there. Then comes in peripheral cues, we have talked about that slightly earlier as well, wherein presence of cues that are peripheral to the primary message arguments like background music, attractive sources, scenery and graphics, and I just talked about that, wherein there is core element and then The argument is supported by elements other than the central argument. Now, here are peripheral cues which actually constitute the complete body to make it attractive. This works for generating a long term recall in case of as far as integrated marketing communication goes, and especially mass advertising. Remember a sweet salesman coming to you promoting a particular kind of a product and talking about so many things other than the product as well, trying to gain your attention, looking at your family values, trying to be consistent with those. His appearance is also very, pleasing, and then he refers to so many other things basically. That is where peripheral cues which are evident in direct sales also. Lots of colors and the role of colors. It's massive. In fact, colors play a very specific role basically, and marketers do spend lots of time on analyzing that. What kind of an impact this color would make on the minds of people. Then comes in communication modality. Now, this is wherein television, radio, social media or magazines they come in, and we have been talking about this long. So, these largely constitute vehicles, and this part I have been calling as modes usually. Now comes in receiver involvement, and this we have talked about when we talked about sender receiver situation also, wherein we talked about message starting from somewhere and reaching somewhere. So, here personal relevance that communication has for a receiver is a critical determinant of the extent and the form of persuasion. So, how relevant it would be for a particular kind of an individual. For example, college going students, how this communication would be relevant for them. Remember that MasterCard advertisement wherein this young girl is coming back home after initial days in her college, let us say 6 months or a year or so, which seems to be very, very long because she has left the home for the first time, and we must all be remembering those things at this moment. I do remember that day when I went to college for the first time, and I was just coming back after 4-5 months, but I felt like coming after so many years actually. And that MasterCard tells you that suddenly you decide going back home, you book your ticket through MasterCard, and as they say, priceless, few things money can't buy. For everything else, it's MasterCard, and that is where relevance comes in. There are several beautiful storyboards and advertisements which are related to relevance. And the last part of it, receiver's initial position, that is, persuasion results from self-generated thoughts that people produce in response to persuasive efforts. Mark these specific words, thoughts that people produce in response to persuasive efforts. So, you see, we have talked about how those thoughts they come into being, but now we have to focus upon the thoughts which might be generated because of a message. And that is where I leave you today. We will meet next time and we will talk about some other aspect of integrated marketing communication. I hope you have been enjoying this course till now and you have started getting involved all through. And today, because we have referred to involvement as well, I want you to think in terms of that particular element of involvement with reference to the messages all around you. Goodbye for now, be happy and keep safe. Thank you.